Folks, gather round. Let's talk about a time in American history when things got a little unhinged. We're talking about the Civil War, but not the boring parts with generals and strategies. We're talking about the Wild West Side show that was the Bushwhackers and the Jayhawkers. Picture this: Missouri, 1861. Tensions are higher than a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. On one side, you've got the Bushwhackers, mostly pro-Confederate guerrillas. They're fighting for their way of life, which apparently involved a lot of hiding in bushes, hence the name. Clever, right? On the other side, we have the Jayhawkers, mainly pro-Union fighters from Kansas. They were known for their lightning raids and their affinity for hats that probably looked ridiculous. Imagine a bunch of guys who just raided your farm, but they're wearing novelty foam fingers on their heads. These weren't your regular armies. These were groups of very passionate, very dedicated, and very trigger-happy neighbors, and they really didn't like each other. Now you might be wondering what made these groups hate each other so much. Was it a disagreement over the best way to cook squirrel? Did they root for different baseball teams, assuming baseball existed back then? Well, the answer is much simpler and much dumber. Borders. You see, Missouri was a slave state, but it hadn't officially joined the Confederacy. Kansas, on the other hand, was all about that free state life. This made the border between them tenser than a tightrope walker with the hiccups. People were crossing back and forth. Accusations were flying faster than a startled pigeon, and things got about as subtle as a donkey in a china shop. Basically, it was the 1860s version of a family Thanksgiving dinner gone wrong. Every good rivalry needs its stars, and boy, did this one have some characters. Let's start with William Clark Quantrill, better known as Bloody Bill Anderson. Now, I'm not saying his nickname was accurate, but the man clearly wasn't invited to many tea parties. Anderson was a bushwhacker leader known for his ruthlessness. He was like the honey badger of the Civil War, except instead of honey, he craved, well, let's just say he wasn't known for his mercy. On the Jayhawker side, we had James Lane, a senator and general who was as fiery as a chili cook-off in a fireworks factory. Lane believed in fighting fire with, well, more fire. He was basically the human equivalent of a "don't tread on me" flag. And then there were the James brothers, Frank and Jesse. These guys were like the Robin Hoods of the Wild West. If Robin Hood robbed banks, shot a lot of people, and occasionally stopped for a picnic in between heists. Section 4. Guerrilla warfare with a side of Ostrich, tales of daring raids and crafty disguises. Now let's talk tactics. These weren't your fancy, by-the-book soldiers. They were guerrillas, which is a fancy French word for we're gonna hide behind this tree and then jump out and yell, "Boo!" really loud. The Bushwhackers and Jayhawkers were masters of disguise, blending into the local population like chameleons in a bag of Skittles. One day they were farmers, the next they were school teachers, and the next they were probably stealing your chickens. Legends abound of their daring raids and outlandish escapes. Some say Bloody Bill Anderson once rode an ostrich into battle just to confuse the enemy. Others claim James Lane could talk his way out of a locked outhouse with nothing but a rusty spoon and a wink. Are these stories true? Who knows? But they're hilarious to imagine. Section 5. When laughter turns to gasps, the sobering reality behind the chuckles. Now, before we get too caught up in the wacky hijinks, it's important to remember that this was still a war, and wars, even ones with ridiculous hats and questionable ostrich riding skills, are brutal. The raids weren't always about stealing chickens and playing pranks. People died, homes were burned, families were torn apart. The laughter of the legend often masks the very real pain that fueled the conflict. Section 6. Fact, fiction, or just plain fun. The enduring legacy of borderland legends. In the end, the Bushwhackers and Jayhawkers faded into the mists of history, leaving behind a legacy as tangled as a plate of spaghetti after a toddler got a hold of it. They're remembered as heroes by some, villains by others, and by most as a bunch of guys who took things a little too far. But that's the thing about history. It's messy. It's full of contradictions, absurdities, and moments that make you shake your head and laugh. And sometimes the best way to understand the past is to embrace the ridiculousness of it all. Section 7. And the award for Best Supporting State in a Comedy goes to the enduring influence of Missouri. You can't tell the story of the Bushwhackers and Jayhawkers without giving a nod to the stage upon which their wacky, wild saga unfolded, Missouri. This is a state that knows a thing or two about being caught in the middle. It's a place where the North bumps up against the South, where city slickers mingle with country folk, and where you're never quite sure if that guy in the overalls is a farmer, a philosopher, or a fugitive from a pie-eating contest. Missouri's unique blend of cultures and contradictions provided the perfect backdrop for the Bushwhackers and Jayhawkers' antics. It's a state that embraces its own brand of quirky chaos, and for that, we salute you, Missouri. You've given us a story we'll never forget, even if we're still not quite sure what happened.